Okay, hello, second lecture of Unit 3. We're talking about the Second Great Awakening and Reform. I played Take Me to Church because this is a lot about religion and how it affected people and all that fun stuff. Okay, so just a reminder, slash probably need to tell you, so there was a First Great Awakening. People were woke once before in the U.S., and that happened right as they were colonizing the Americas, so think the Puritans. The First Great Awakening is the idea that one is predestined for hell. So this is where the Puritans got all their jam, right? Like, you're born going to hell, there's not much you can do about it, yada yada. So this is the First Great Awakening. We can argue people weren't totally woke, so people got woke again. And this is called the Second Great Awakening. The time period for this is about 1790 to the 1860s. So, in general, there was a movement to rely more on reason than on religion. This started in Europe and moved over to the Americas after America gained its independence. So there was a change in religion to sort of fit that, and the idea of predestination is no longer a thing. So remember, Puritans believed we were born to go to hell? Well, they decided to kind of pull back on that a little bit. Various religions in the U.S. did. Instead, the idea is that anyone can change their fate, and it starts with changing who they are. So you can go to heaven as long as you change who you are. Methodists and Baptists were the big movers for this. They kind of spearheaded the idea that one can change themselves and go to heaven. It also changed the way church was structured. So the Second Great Awakening, more women began going to church, and a majority of new church members were women. And these women promoted the spread of these reformed religions, such as Methodists and Baptists. They also had camp meetings instead of big old fancy churches, so everyone had access to the church. So that picture there is a depiction of how they would just have little meetings outside for everyone to talk to. The Second Great Awakening eventually led to different reform movements, such as temperance, abolition, and suffrage. The idea that anyone can be saved, we need to support people being saved. Get what I'm saying? Okay. So this starts with education. The first is people need to be educated to be saved. But there was also an idea that that the United States needs to promote education to have an educated democracy and educated voters. So the idea that educated voters are good voters, they'll make the right choices in democracy. However, the changes were a little bit challenging, right? So for example, a lot of schools would only be open for a few months. A lot of them were kind of scarce with teachers. There weren't many people who wanted to teach. And most of these schools ended up being a thing only for the privileged. If you had to work on your farm, you had to help your family, you had to go to a factory to work to help your family, you're not going to school, right? Okay. There were also a change in textbooks that they would use. So if you look here, this McGuffey's Third Eclectic Reader, this is called a McGuffey Reader, and it was used within schools and at home to help students or teach people how to read. We also had the first dictionary published by Daniel Webster. Yes, Webster dictionaries came out to also help students read. Still, the change was kind of hard to see. There were still 1 million white adults who were illiterate, and if you were a slave, there was no chance you were getting taught in school how to read. There was also a movement to have state-supported universities, sort of like University of Colorado, CU, go Buffs, but it really was only for the privileged. And there were some universities for women, solely for women, that opened, but there's not a lot of access, and the type of education in those universities were very centered towards women, like how to eat dinner, whatever, stuff like that. Okay, we also have reform movements. A lot of these reform movements were led by upper-class women, upper-class white women. Just gonna say that again, upper-class white women. One reform is for prisons. So the reform was who is punished, so you shouldn't go to prison for stealing a loaf of bread or something like that, and how they are punished. So instead you see in this picture there's like some dude whipping people, right, whatever. You're not whipped, you're not doing this stuff. There's a change to how you're punished in prison. And the other movement is temperance. So temperance is a movement to abolish or limit the use of alcohol. During this time in the United States, everybody and their mother was drinking. It was a hard life. You had to work a lot. You were kind of bored, not much to do. So a lot of people worked. Well, as a result, obviously it would hurt the labor movement. People showing up drunk to work doesn't really help them. And there was an increase in abuse towards women, which is what you see here. So the temperance movement appealed to family to prevent drinking because it hurts women and men, right? So if you look at this caption down here, it talks about the effects of temperance as far as abuse goes. But the other thing is if women are relying on men to work and they're drunk and they're not working, then the women don't get that money or that money spent on alcohol. You could also say the same for women, right? If women were drinking and they had to work and the money was being used on alcohol, it's just a dang hard life, right? So there is the temperance movement and a movement to change and prevent people from drinking. Okay. There was also some reform movements led and targeted towards females. So the idea is trying to change the status of women. This was led off by white, well-off women, so white, higher-class women. Yeah, white, higher-class women. 1848 is the year that some big things happened. So it was the Seneca Falls movement, women's rights movement, and a famous speech given by Elizabeth Cady Stanton called the Declaration of Sentiments was given. So Elizabeth Cady Stanton reads the Declaration of Sentiments. It's very similar to the Declaration of Independence, and she demands rights for women, like the right to vote. It became a big deal, very scandalous. All the men were upset, all the women were happy, yada yada, that fun stuff. However, the Civil War breaks out in 1861, and that kind of derails the movement for female reform movements at this time. Okay, so we have a lot of reform movements, like let's help society, let's help people, but we also have something called transcendentalism happening. This famous dude, Henry David Thoreau, talks about it. I think Mr. Hansen's class, some of you might read about transcendentalism, so that'll be fun. But the idea behind it is there's value in self-reliance, individuality. Like that is the crux of American culture. That's what America needs, individuality and self-reliance. And therefore, we're very hostile to authority. I don't need the government telling me what to do. I don't need people telling me what to do. Man needs to work for himself. So it's interesting because this kind of tugs at some of the reform movements that were pushing men to be better. And a lot of these movements were led by women, which is interesting. The last movement, we'll focus more on it, is a move to abolition. So abolition is trying to end or change slavery, but that'll become a bigger deal, a bigger thing for us to focus on later on. Okay, hopefully this lecture wasn't too bad, wasn't too long, all that fun stuff. Make sure you take notes, and we'll go from there.